August 10, 258 AD. The scorching summer sun punishes the crowd gathered in a square of the Eternal City. Soldiers push a man of about 30 years to the center of a circle, formed by curious and horrified spectators. The prisoner's wrists are chained, but his face shows no fear. On the contrary, there is a disconcerting serenity in his eyes. In the center of the square awaits an instrument of torture that would make even the toughest warriors tremble, an enormous iron grill suspended above burning embers. The soldiers tear off the condemned man's garments and stretch him out on the metal, binding his limbs so he cannot move. The heat is already unbearable, even before his body touches the scalding surface. The embers are stoked. The metal begins to glow red. The smell of burning flesh spreads through the air. The crowd expects to hear screams of agony, pleas for mercy. But what happens next defies all human understanding. The man remains calm. His face, instead of contorting in agony, seems transfigured by a kind of ecstasy. And then, to the complete astonishment of all present, he speaks to the executioner in a clear, even humorous voice. "You can turn me over. This side is already roasted." This man was Lawrence of Huesca, a deacon of the Church of Rome, and his extraordinary courage in the face of one of the cruelest deaths ever recorded in history would transform him into one of Christianity's most venerated martyrs. To understand how Lawrence arrived at this surreal moment of heroism or madness, we need to go back in time and learn his story. Lawrence was born around the year 225 in Huesca, in the Roman province of Hispania, present-day Spain. The son of Christian parents, he received a good education and from an early age demonstrated great religious devotion. During his theological studies in Caesar Augusta, today's Zaragoza, he met the future Pope Sixtus II, with whom he established a strong friendship that would change the course of his life. When Sixtus went to Rome, Lawrence accompanied him, and when his mentor was elected pope in 257, he appointed Lawrence as archdeacon, the first of the 7 deacons of Rome. This was no ordinary position. In the structure of the early church, deacons performed crucial functions, not only spiritual, but also administrative. As archdeacon, Lawrence had the important responsibility of administering the church's goods, distributing alms to the poor, and caring for the treasures and sacred objects. The moment Lawrence assumed this position could not have been more dangerous. Emperor Valerian had initiated one of the most severe persecutions of Christians. In 257, he issued a first edict ordering all bishops, priests, and deacons to sacrifice to the Roman gods or be banished. The following year, he hardened the persecution even further with a second edict. Christian leaders who refused to abandon their faith would be immediately executed. The storm was not long in reaching the Church of Rome. On August 6, 258, while celebrating the liturgy in the catacombs of Praetextatus, Pope Sixtus II was surprised, captured, and summarily beheaded, along with 4 of his deacons. When Lawrence learned of his mentor's arrest, he ran to meet him. According to tradition, upon seeing Sixtus being led to execution, Lawrence lamented with tears, "Where are you going, Father, without your son? Where are you going, holy priest, without your deacon?" Sixtus responded with prophetic words, "I do not leave you, my son. I merely precede you. In 3 days, you will follow me." The Roman authorities quickly turned their attention to Lawrence. The prefect of Rome, knowing he was the treasurer of the church, saw a golden opportunity. He ordered Lawrence to deliver all the treasures of the church within 3 days. Lawrence asked for time to gather all the riches, which was granted. During these 3 days, he worked feverishly, not to hide the treasures, but to distribute as much as possible to the poor. Then, when the deadline expired, he presented himself to the prefect, accompanied by a multitude of beggars, disabled people, the sick, and the elderly. "Behold the treasures of the church," he declared, pointing to the poor. The prefect, feeling ridiculed, became enraged. He ordered Lawrence to be tortured to reveal where the true riches were. But Lawrence remained steadfast, insisting that the poor and needy were, indeed, Christ's greatest treasure on earth. Faced with such insolence, the prefect determined that Lawrence should die in the slowest and most painful way possible, roasted alive on a grill. It is difficult for the modern mind to comprehend the level of pain involved in this type of execution. The victim was exposed to intense heat, but not enough to cause quick death. Instead, the skin and muscles were slowly cooked, causing prolonged and indescribable agony. It was in this context that Lawrence uttered his famous phrase of defiance. Some historians question the veracity of this account, suggesting he may have been beheaded like the other deacons. But the image of the saint on the grill, maintaining his serenity and even his sense of humor in the face of such a terrible death, has captured the Christian imagination for centuries. Tradition says that during his torment, Lawrence prayed not only for himself, but for the conversion of Rome. His face, according to accounts, shone with an unusual light, and his body emanated a pleasant aroma instead of the expected smell of burning flesh. Many of those present, including some Roman senators, were reportedly so impressed by his supernatural courage that they converted to Christianity on the spot. After his death, Lawrence's body was collected by Christians and buried in a cemetery on the Via Tiburtina, when Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity in the following century. A small basilica was erected over the martyr's tomb, which would later be enlarged and become the Basilica of San Lorenzo, Fuori le Mura, one of the 7 pilgrimage churches in Rome. The influence of Saint Lawrence transcended the limits of the city where he died by far. In Spain, his homeland, devotion to the saint inspired the construction of one of the country's most impressive monuments, the Monastery of San Lorenzo de El Escorial, erected by King Philip II in the 16th century. The complex was designed in the shape of a grill, in homage to the instrument of the saint's martyrdom. The figure of Saint Lawrence also inspired countless works of art. Painters such as Fra Angelico, Titian, and Rubens portrayed his martyrdom, capturing both the horror of torture and the supernatural serenity of the saint. In literature, his story was celebrated by poets such as Prudentius, whose hymn to Saint Lawrence in the Peristephanon is one of the most beautiful texts on Christian martyrdom. What makes Lawrence's story so extraordinary is not just the physical courage with which he faced a terrible death, but his ability to transform suffering itself into a testimony of faith. By declaring that the poor were the true treasures of the church, he established a principle that resonates through the centuries. True wealth lies not in objects of gold and silver, but in service to those most in need. His famous phrase on the grill, "You can turn me over, this side is already roasted," reveals not only courage, but a sense of humor that defies understanding. How is it possible that someone, in the midst of such extreme pain, could still make a joke? Such behavior seems to defy the limits of human endurance. Indeed, many theologians throughout the centuries have interpreted Lawrence's martyrdom not as a feat of purely human resistance, but as an example of the power of divine grace acting through an ordinary person. Saint Augustine, one of the great fathers of the Church, wrote about Lawrence. His love for Christ burned so intensely that he did not feel the external flames. This perspective suggests that what we see in Lawrence's martyrdom is not just human heroism, but a manifestation of the divine, a man so completely absorbed by love for God that even the most extreme physical pain becomes secondary. Whatever interpretation one gives to his martyrdom, It is undeniable that Lawrence's story has touched something deep in the human psyche. His name remains alive, not only in churches and works of art, but in language itself. The term laurel, as a symbol of victory, is etymologically linked to his Latin name, Laurentius. St. Lawrence's story challenges us to reflect on our own priorities. What do we consider treasures in our lives? For what values would we be willing to suffer? His life and death remind us that there are things worth living for, and, if necessary, dying for. In modern times, when comfort and security are so valued, the story of this man who smiled in the face of the cruelest torture serves as a powerful counterpoint. It reminds us that true human greatness lies not in the pursuit of pleasure or the escape from pain, but in the capacity to transcend suffering for love of something greater than ourselves. Catholic tradition celebrates Saint Lawrence as the patron saint of the poor, of librarians, for the literary treasures of the church he protected, and, with a touch of appreciative irony, of cooks. His feast is commemorated on August 10th, the date of his martyrdom. On the night of his feast, an astronomical phenomenon seems to pay him homage. The meteor shower known as the Tears of St. Lawrence streaks the summer sky with trails of light, as if they were the embers that consumed him, now transformed into shooting stars. Thus, the story of the man who was roasted alive and smiled during torture continues to illuminate our understanding of heroism, faith, and the human capacity to transcend even the most terrible circumstances.